Woohoo!
So, our last category, psychedelics. So, the first one is psilocybin. When did you start using mushrooms?
Graduate school was the first time I ever did mushrooms.
So, how did it affect you?
Man, I've had some outrageously great experiences on mushrooms. It connects you with everything around you. Like people, nature especially. Like you feel very at one with it, and all of a sudden you begin to, it almost feels like you have an unconscious, spiritual, mental, psychological connection with everything alive.
Great.
And you can feel it, and you can begin to feel how things that are alive feel you. And then everything is more vibrant, like the colors, like especially green. And almost more importantly, it helps you understand how mediated your experience is with the rest of the universe based on your own brain functions and, what we call sobriety, right? That's not like the only reality.
Of course.
Right? And so it was a very important educational drug for me, as well as recreational.
What's your relationship like it with now?
I haven't really done mushrooms properly since maybe after graduate school, which has been, probably 25 years for me. And I'll admit, I'm maybe just a little bit afraid of mushrooms right now. First of all, they're gross as shit. They taste like ass. And they do fuck with my stomach a little bit.
Yeah.
But listen, with psychedelics, it's about set and setting, right? Like you have to be in the right place spiritually and the right place physically. And, I just don't know that I'm in that open mindset right now where...
So good or bad for college?
So once again, listen, if you had a group of friends that you really trusted and you made sure you got some really good mushrooms and you went to a park and you had some great tunes and, some good snacks and, you really plan it like a trip.
Yeah.
Right? Like you plan it, it could be a pretty magical experience.
Okay. So, LSD. When do you start using acid?
Same time frame.
How does it affect you?
Acid and mushrooms are definitely on the same scale, right? They're definitely very similar drugs for me. Mushrooms tend to feel a little bit more connect with nature, just a little more natural. Acid is a little bit less full-on connection with nature. Maybe just a little bit less happy. I think mushrooms tend to make you happy while you're tripping, whereas acid can be more neutral.
Okay.
That's why they talk about bad trips with acid. It's a little cleaner, I feel like. I feel like it's a cleaner psychedelic experience, but very similar, great thoughts. Definitely have great connections. I always have great connections with nature when I do those kinds of things. Great connections with other people. Although I am someone who doesn't really love other people when I'm on psychedelics.
Okay.
I love the universe more, a little more. But I would say all the other stuff is very similar. I think it can be life-changing. I think done in the right setting, it could be good for a college setting.
Do you have any bad trips on acid that you could describe for me?
No, I never had a bad trip on acid. Okay, so this is kind of weird, right? So I was in Austin, Texas. It was Halloween. I took 2 tabs of extremely liquid gel, acid, which is usually a little stronger. And I came home and this is going to sound terrible, but I injected heroin.
That sounds amazing idea. I should do that.
On acid. And it wasn't a bad trip. And then I watched The Wall by Pink Floyd. And the thing is, somehow they neutralize each other.
Oh, great.
Like somehow, like I didn't have a good heroin high, and I didn't have a good acid high, and so I was extremely disappointed.
That's so funny.
That's the worst trip I've ever had in acid.
I mean, that's probably the best case scenario for that situation.
Yeah, that could have gone. That could have gone
You
very.
were lucky. You were lucky.
That could have gone very sour for sure.
Okay.
DMT. When did you start using DMT?
DMT would have been later. That wasn't really something that was around or in the common consciousness when I was in school.
Right.
I think I started doing my first extraction tech back when you were about 1 year old, so 2011.
So you were just like using DMT like exclusively throughout our childhoods?
I haven't done DMT that many times. I would say maybe like less than maybe a dozen times.
Dozen times.
And that's largely just because, I've never had a connection for that.
Right.
So I've always had to make my own.
Right.
And back then they have simpler techs now that don't involve quite as much chemistry. But back then the texts that were available and known were a little bit complicated.
You were like Walter White from the hit show Breaking Bad. How did it affect you?
Well, DMT is unlike any other hallucinogenic that I've done. One, it totally takes over your visual apparatus, right?
Uh-huh.
So like
You're full on hallucinating.
and it snaps in. Okay, so like. So you smoke it, and if you take the hit right, it's all of a sudden it's just like all of a sudden I kind of hear this, and it's like showtime, and you're in you've just entered into the realm.
The realm?
The weird thing about DMT is it feels like it takes you to a place almost, and it's a place that's inhabited. So the most common and recurring theme in any DMT trip is that you encounter entities.
Okay, so it's an entity drug.
Well, yeah, I mean you're definitely going to be interfacing with something that feels very not you, and I think so. And it's very common. It's very similar for almost everyone. So, for instance, I can go online and I've seen paintings that people have done of the entities that they've encountered, and it's like I know that guy. Like it's exactly the same dude that I met. So people call them the machine elves sometimes because they kind of have this sort of angularity to them. They're a little maniacal and playful and.
Hold on. Can you elaborate on maniacal there?
Well, so one of the things about DMT is these entities are not your friends. But they're not necessarily your enemies either. It on some level, like, so the way that it definitely feels is these are higher entities.
Okay.
And they're either amused or slightly annoyed by your presence. So, best case scenario, if they're amused, they're just going to fuck with you a little bit.
All right, great.
Just mess with you in kind of a playful way, maybe slightly educational way. But they can also be unhappy with your presence there.
Oh, yeah, of course.
A lot of people will say that, and this doesn't ever happen to me, but they'll go to a place and the entities will be like, "You're not allowed here yet," or "You're not allowed here right now. Leave." And it's very, and you just get zoomed out.
The way the entities like they
kick you out.
Kick you out of your trip.
Well, yeah, you're still tripping, but you're not where you thought you wanted to go. They reject you essentially. Well, and so by the way, the way that I'm talking about this is totally the way anyone who's taken DMT will talk about it, and it's
like a crazy person.
Well, yeah, and it's very in the DMT community, there's a lot of question. Are these entities real?
Yeah.
Are we somehow connecting to some other realm? And obviously I'm a science guy, right? And I understand our brains, and I understand that I literally just put a chemical in my brain.
Yeah.
So, and I don't believe that consciousness, as we've been discussing, right, is some magical floating,
Right.
I'm connecting cosmologically through the planes or anything else. I think that I'm hallucinating.
So then how do you explain the machine elves?
I don't like that. That doesn't seem very complicated to me. Like we encounter entities in reality all the time, or our brains are used to processing entities.
Yeah.
And so for a drug to be able to create entities
Yeah.
seems
Well, yeah, it's not that big of a
like it's
deal.
activating exactly those brain areas that are used to perceiving entities.
But how do you explain them like looking identical and acting identical throughout users' experiences?
Well, listen, I don't necessarily have an explanation, and I would like. So what I was going to say is I would like to do more research
We should do
with DMT.
we should do an episode on just DMT, guys.
But I'm here in Belize, and I left all my tech in New York before we moved. So,
you're meth lab.
and I definitely don't. The DMT is not something that is going to be available in Belize.
Great. So, what were those entities educational about?
Like, it's hard for me to remember now. Like that, was what? Like that's 10 years ago. That's kind of the weird thing about the entities. I feel like they kind of like gesture at things and allude to things, and basically they're talking about like they're kind of alluding to this higher plane that you don't have access to at this point. Well, and by the way, one common theme that and this is throughout a lot of different psychedelic experiences. I think that the one consistent sort of philosophical point
Right.
that people will come back to, and this is where it begins to get a little weird, and that is this stuff real or not? What we're experiencing right now is essentially we are like a god. There's an entity, a bigger entity, that has segmented off its consciousness into multiple smaller consciousnesses, which we could call humans in this world, right?
Okay.
And it did that because it's kind of playing with itself. Do you know what I mean? Like, so on some level, we're like God experiencing himself.
Like the egg theory.
I don't know what the egg theory is.
Okay. Like this fiction where it's like you are like being reborn into like every human on Earth, like throughout like time and space, and then like
You experience all of them.
After you experience all of them, you become like a god.
Yeah, sure. So, but something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
So in either way, it's the point that like, this moment is just me experiencing this very segmented portion of being, which is the totality of all being.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What's your relationship with the machine elves now?
Well, like I said, I don't really have a relationship with that drug at this point because I haven't been able to get a hold of it. But I do feel that I'm in a place right now where I would be interested to experiment further.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
So if you ever get to college and you get this all figured out,
Good or bad for college?
let me know. I feel like DMT is probably a little bit more than you need in college. Like I feel like
The machine elves probably aren't going to give me study tips.
yeah. I mean, I mean, maybe that's just because I encountered that drug at a later point in my life, but I feel like there's plenty to learn in college before you need to encounter that kind of introspection.
What's a sign that a drug is good to use?
Well, one, I don't know that I necessarily endorse any that way necessarily.
Oh,
but
that's totally not what our conversation's about.
I would I would say that one, that you feel like there's something to learn or some sort of different mode of consciousness you want to enter into.
Okay.
That's important. And that, it's something that you're extremely cautious of, right? That it doesn't feel like, oh, this is no big deal.
Right.
Because that's when they do become a big deal.
Like you're treating it with the way it deserves. So then what's a sign that a drug is bad to use?
The worst sign is when you just fall in love. Like the first time or the third time or whatever it is, you're just like, man, that was awesome. And you feel like it's you, and you just feel very comfortable with it, and you let your guard down, and that's when addiction starts.
Yeah. Any last thoughts?
Always harken back to the philosophy of leading the good life.
Okay.
Right? I mean, you want to look at this thing, you want to always look at everything holistically. And you have to be brutally honest with yourself whether consuming some substance is leading you into a place that creates a better life for you. And that can be really tricky, because one of the things that drugs are great at is making you love them more than you love anything else. And that's when it becomes a real problem. And I guess the other thing I would say is one of the main reasons you have to be very careful with drugs is they will put you in a heightened state of pleasure, excitement, relaxation, introspection, whatever their thing is, that you can't achieve with a sober mind. Ever.
Okay.
And so once you experience those new baselines, those new highs, it just takes a little bit of the polish off of, or the shine off of day-to-day living. And you'll never be the same, right? You'll always know those experiences, and you know, they can be great memories or whatever, but they can also make you kind of feel a little bit of ennui, or you're missing something from the day-to-day.
We hope that you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please consider checking out the next one in the series.
Or some of our other series on philosophy and life.
We upload videos every Friday, so don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you next week.